Were you expecting Freddy to fight with Kung Fu?
I was expecting them to fight more with each other. My name is George, and with me is Chris, and today we are talking about the 2003's horror slasher movie, Freddy vs. Jason. I don't know about horror.
No. What's the scariest part? Do you remember anything?
Nothing was scary in this movie.
No, they didn't really try, it felt like.
No. Even the obviously cheap, loud noise jump scares didn't scare me. Because it was so obvious that it was going to happen.
Right. So this movie is directed by Ronnie Yu, who started out as one of the many Hong Kong directors that eventually came over, was poached by Hollywood. Ronnie Yu directed a childhood favorite of mine. I'm curious if you've seen it, George. The film Warriors of Virtue.
Warriors of Virtue. Okay.
So this film was an obvious attempt to maybe Never-Ending Story meets Ninja Turtles. Kid gets travels to a magic land and encounters kung fu fighting kangaroo warriors. Anyway, so then but he had a good few years in Hollywood. He made Freddy vs. Jason, which obviously is a dream come true for many directors, and he also got to do Bride of Chucky right around this time. So he had a big impact on the horror franchises.
It was really boring for me. And it made me wish that we were watching the movie he made after Freddy vs. Jason, which is Jet Li's Fearless.
Oh, yeah. That's a little step up.
Yeah, it's much better. But Freddy vs. Jason. Okay, so like I said last time at the end of the episode, I've never seen any of the Freddy movies or Jason movies. I know who they are as like just sort of cultural, iconic slasher characters or villains. And I have a general understanding, like, just from like references in other things, right? Like Simpsons have always referenced Freddy, right? He's the dream guy, and then Jason is, as far as I know, he's like one of the original menacing, slow walking silent monster.
What's the line with Homer? Hey Bart, look at my mask and chainsaw.
But knowing, like, without any knowledge of these two characters, I was still expecting like a fairly entertaining, cheesy, in a good way kind of fighting monster film. And it just wasn't. It was just following a bunch of boring teenagers for the majority of the film. Sure.
And so the answer or the explanation there, I guess, would be that in their respective franchises, when they're alone, you're generally following all these teenagers as they slowly get slashed. So it technically makes sense that this is what they did with the movie. But as you're indicating, is it the most satisfying thing they could have done with the movie? Maybe not. I don't know.
No.
In 1993, there was this like iconic moment in horror film history. It's this long shot on Jason's mask lying on the ground after he's been defeated again, and then all of a sudden, Freddy's arm with the glove pops up out of the ground and grabs Jason's mask and pulls it under.
Oh.
And so in 1993, I can only imagine what it was like to sit in a theater and completely out of the blue have this massive setup for Freddy vs. Jason. And then somewhat frustrating when a film didn't come out for 10 years. So my big thing for this movie, like what I really wanted to give them credit for, was I thought they did genuinely find a way to combine the franchises, like in every way, like aesthetically and tonally and in terms of the content and everything.
Okay.
I thought that was neat and a little bit different from Marvel, because the thing that Marvel has, obviously, is all the movies, even when they have directors with quite distinct visual styles or when they have characters that are quite different from the others, there is just like a basic Marvel look. Whereas in this one, they had quite a challenging task, really, of taking these two franchises that had developed a tone and a style and an aesthetic and a feel. They had to put them together in a way that kind of made sense and that would satisfy both. I don't know if the finished movie is like a thrilling thing for me. I felt a little bit outside of this movie, I guess. Like it just maybe wasn't made for me.
I did notice that it was fairly easy for me to tell when a scene is a Jason scene and when a scene is a Freddy scene.
Interesting.
There was a certain, I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but there was something in the visual language that told me which one it's going to be coming up.
Which reminds me, if you're interested in listening to the full-length discussion of this episode, you can find it on our Patreon. The link is on screen and in the description down below. If you go over there, you will get the entire recording in an audio format like a podcast. Check it out. Support us. Help us keep doing this. We really appreciate it. Anyways.
Very, very basically, to me, the Jason movies are about the fear of the demon outside, outside the village in the trees. And the Freddy movies are about the fear of the demon who's inside yourself. So the point of Jason, as I understand it, is that like the cruelty of kids and the indifference of the people who care for them can turn someone hateful. The indifference of the world has created this demon kind of thing. And like bullies have created this demon, and he has an origin story, and that's why in Freddy vs. Jason he can be reduced to this like crying little kid. And conversely, the point of Freddy, as I understand it, is basically if you let your fears have control over you, there's no limit to the damage they can do to you. Because of this, they have pretty different tones for me anyway. Like the tone of the Friday movies is pretty light because we're essentially on Jason's side. It's not that the characters deserve to die, but we know that that's why we're there. And the movies are basically like this big party. And then you move into the horror part of the party where Jason just like slashes everyone for the second half. And so visually it just has this like campfire tale kind of look. So it's basically like open wish fulfillment with the filmmakers just putting on a show for you. And then in the Freddy films, in the sequels anyway, the joke is kind of that like it's Freddy himself who puts on the show for you. So the Freddy films have like these two registers. There's the real world plot of the teens, which is essentially always just that the teens are dying and adults won't listen to them, and they're trying to explain, but no one cares. And then there's the dream world, which is Freddy inside the psyches of these characters putting on a show for us, the viewer. So the Freddy stories at their core are kind of like about young people, I think, trying to take back control of their psyches against on one side parents who don't believe them, and on the other side someone inside their dreams who's trying to pervert them. And it speaks to this real fear about growing up in the world that I think we all have, which is that like when you're a kid, it seems like everyone around you wants to change your mind. Stay on the path, don't venture into the dark cave because Freddy's in there. And then what the films are about are, what happens when Luke Skywalker ventures into the dark cave, which is if you go deep enough, what you find in there is behind your deepest fears is your own face. So the two franchises are about fundamentally different things. They have different visual approaches, they have different audio approaches, and everything else. And I think everything about what I just said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is somewhat in Freddy vs. Jason, and they do kind of fit together.
I wasn't sure if it's because I did Cabin in the Woods recently on CineCringe, which was clearly a film that kind of pokes fun at this sort of movie.
Yeah.
But then this movie did the exact same thing as that one, but did it seriously, or tried to make it serious. So what ended up happening is that it felt like it was almost a comedy, but it didn't realize it was. Back in 2003 when this movie came out, was it also a cliche?
The way the movie opens after a brief prologue is with a young woman at camp getting nude on the docks, and then she swims, and then she gets stabbed, and etc. And like you said, it feels essentially like a parody. And then we realize that the reason it feels like a parody is that this is like a Freddy dream. But it's, like you said, it starts us off immediately with this feeling of like, we already know it's silly, and we're already at the level of doing a parody to start the movie. And I think I was thrown off by this sequence in particular, actually. I think I'm with you that like I didn't know the whole time if it was like a parody or if it was supposed to feel like Scream kind of tone, or if they were doing this seriously. I didn't know which one it was.
Had they stuck with that little idea, and maybe throughout the entire film, you have Freddy make fun of Jason's previous films, and keep creating these like cliche scenarios, and be like, how come you only ever kill at the camp full of naked teenagers or whatever, right? And just keep poking fun at him about it. Then that would have been a consistent tone. But then they had this at the beginning, and then they dropped it, and then it just never came back, and then the rest of it felt like, okay, now the next time we see a naked teenage girl, we're supposed to take it seriously.
It's like more serious, and it's like 5 minutes later.
4 years ago, I thought
Oh, enough with this bullshit talk. Let's go shake our ass to the dance floor. Come on.
So we have this scene where Lori, the main survivor girl, I guess, right, meets her ex-boyfriend again. Like, I'm assuming he's from the previous movies and he was a survivor in the previous film. He escaped from a mental asylum. They meet up. Finally, we get to have this moment where he's going to tell her what's going on, or his theory on Freddy and so on, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen up to this point that Laurie's been obsessed with the dream kill that she keeps dreaming about. Within 10 seconds of this serious conversation that we're about to have a character realization, Kelly Rowland's character comes in, interrupts, and says, "Let's go shake our asses."
Yeah.
And that one line was sufficient enough for her to go, "Oh, okay, let's just go then. We don't need to finish this conversation that I've been dying to find out the entire time so far."
I'm glad you went right there, because this Caroline yelled at the TV at this exact moment that you're talking about.
Is this supposed to be another, like, jab at the cliche of the dumb teenagers and dumb characters not following through what would be the most important thing? Or is it just that filmmakers didn't realize that they are playing out a cliche?
I am as baffled as you on this one. It seemed like openly absurd writing, but it didn't seem like a joke.
Why have Kelly Rowland be the one that interrupts the conversation? Because it just doesn't make sense. Why not just have Jason showing up and the massacre be the interruption? Because then that would be a reasonable interruption for her to go, "Okay, let's talk about this later," and flee now.
They could have even done that with the footage they had. They could have cut it together that way.
Yeah, it could have just cut right to Jason showing up, and then they just run, right?
Yeah.
Of all those options available, "let's go shake our asses" is the least reasonable one.
Get out of the van. Get out of the van!
There's like a conspiracy in the town where no one talks about Freddy so that no one can fear Freddy. But then as soon as anyone gets murdered, the adults immediately all start talking about Freddy, which is what gives Freddy power. So it's like the worst conspiracy ever.
Yeah. And also, isn't having a conspiracy mean you're fearing the subject of that conspiracy?
Think so.
I think the issue is this, because it's very easy for people to just say, you know, "Oh, it's a silly slasher movie, just go with it," right? And that's fine. And that's a reasonable thing to ask the audience if that's what you establish. And I think, like, for example, Austin Powers, the second one, did a really great job with that when they literally broke the fourth wall and said, "Don't worry about the time traveling, just enjoy it." Because they knew that this was going to be a silly spoof that makes no sense.
Yes.
But in this case, if you try to establish some ground rules in this world you're building, you have to stick with it. You can't just keep breaking the rule whenever it's convenient.
But I did want to call out Christopher Nolan, because we come to this sequence here where they're ripping around the van. Jason has been injected with drugs and put to sleep by Freddy, and so he's passed out in the back, and they're driving in this van, and then they gotta jack into Jason's dreams to pull Freddy out. But then while they're in there, Freddy like jacks into Jason's like childhood memories from inside his dream and like goes into the camp, which I just want to say is the plot of Inception. So, Christopher Nolan, we've figured you out. Everyone thinks you're this mastermind original genius, but really you just watched Freddy versus Jason when you were a drunk teenager. So if we watch the rest of the Jason movies, maybe we'll find Interstellar, and
it turns out
Memento
the entire filmography of Nolan just comes from the Jason and Freddy franchises.
Welcome to my world, bitch.
We already kind of got there a little bit, so let's just talk about the final fight, because obviously that's the thing. It's in the title. What did you think? You enjoyed it?
No, not really. I think the reason I didn't really enjoy the final fight was because it kept getting interrupted by the people. You know, when they were in the dream in the van and it was just the two of them fighting for a bit there, that was great because there was no interruption. Even, I mean, they cut back to the outside of the van to explain why they're like that, but it was mostly focused on Freddy versus Jason fighting with like psychological things added to it, right? With the water preventing Jason from moving and trapping him, and then he breaks down. That was interesting, but it was too short. And then it got to the amusement park that we're looking at right now with a roller coaster shot, and then these like canisters of something.
The Gone in 60 Seconds canisters.
Yeah. It became silly. You lost the moment, that brief moment of depth that was built up by the movie in the dream sequence.
this is something that the writers obviously understood, but I'm not sure that there was a way around, which is like, obviously they have to fight in Freddy's dream world, and obviously they have to fight in the real world. But in either case, one is like the clear winner. Like, Jason's going to win in real life, and Freddy's going to win in the dream world, and they kind of like tried to find some ways to mess with that, but in the end, there's not really, like, you can't have Jason win inside Freddy's dream.
Yeah.
And you can't have, I mean, well, just look at Freddy once they're in real life.
This, we still don't have a name yet, so we're gonna do the what can we do better than Jason Freddy fight. Yeah, that's good. I think that works.
Well,
oh, okay, I'm going first. All right. Okay, so something I mentioned throughout the episode, which is that I want to see less regular humans and teenagers. So what I would have done is that I would turn their battle against each other into a competition of killing sprees to see who can do more for whatever justification they can come up with for their existence, right? For maybe like the more kills they have, the stronger they become or whatever, right? And that Jason is the straightforward, just hack and slash, and then Freddy keeps trying to steal his kills, so to speak.
yeah,
And-
right.
Yeah, and play on the dynamic that Freddy always goes too elaborate, and then the laugh, and then take it to more of a comedic, almost a spoof, and go into the funny realm where you can have the trope of Jason is required to slowly walk menacingly towards his victims for no
Right.
reason, right? Lean into it, rather than trying to make it actually scary.
I think that makes sense, and I think it would work for me because there's the moment in the movie where Jason steals Freddy's kill, right? Freddy's like drawing back to kill, and then blood explodes out of the person's chest, and Freddy realizes that Jason has killed them in the real world and like stolen his kill, and he gets all angry about it. And that for me was like one of the most fun little moments. And so what you're proposing is a movie that's just based on that dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that would work great for me. As far as the plot went, they did more of a Freddy plot than a Jason plot, and that kind of makes sense because Jason plot is counselors have sex, get killed, whereas a Freddy plot has something going on. But I didn't find it all that satisfying to go through the steps of the Freddy plot in this one because, like you said, I just wanted them to fight. I didn't need teens uncovering a conspiracy and figuring out the hypnosil and all of that stuff. It's basically set in Freddy environments. My pitch would be to instead set this movie in Jason environments and set it out at the camp and have Freddy come there. As actually happens in this movie, there's a brief sequence where Jason does some slashing and then realizes that he's inside a Freddy dream. That's the model I would have liked to see for the entire movie. I would have liked to see it start with Jason doing some slashing, and it starts like a Friday movie, and then something goes wrong. Jason realizes that he's inside this dream world, and now he's got to slash his way out, and Freddy keeps like spinning new dreams and trying to mess with his murder spree, and Jason has to kind of like slash his way through these different tiers of reality, always trying to get out to the real world, allowing most of the action, rather than being in the suburbs like a Freddy movie, to be at the camp like a Jason movie. It's not a big rearranging pitch. It's basically my pitch is like have Freddy come into a Jason movie rather than the other way around, which is how it felt.
All right, so next week we are doing Alien vs. Predator from 2004 by Paul W.S. Anderson. You know, having seen the Alien films and Predator within the last like 6-7 months, this should be fairly interesting. Yeah.
So this will be the exact opposite because you'll have all the background for this one.
Yeah, fairly fresh in my mind too. So I'm curious how that would go because they are fairly similar in terms of like danger level and alien anatomy and all that. And I really hope there's not too much of a focus on people.
It's definitely a matchup that will require less setup.
Yeah, it's much more balanced, I feel.
Because all that has to happen is that the Predator goes to a planet with aliens or vice versa. You know how you could really help us out, Hollywood, to round out this duo of films that we're doing now is just make Freddy versus Jason versus Alien versus Predator.
Oh, that's do predators and xenomorphs dream? Okay, all right, that's it then for this week's episode. Press like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
I don't have a thing ready.